Morning. I hope you're all well on this Wednesday morning, 10 o'clock. Wednesday let me just check, the 16th of September. Can't believe we're already halfway through September. Although I think a lot of us are hoping that this year, not hoping, but this year needs to be just gotten done. Inch and a 6-inch, and what that basically means is that the size of the block that's finished will be a 10 or a 12 or an 8 or whatever it may be, whichever size cube you happen to be working with. So today we're gonna work with something quite simple. I think with this particular block, the emphasis is definitely on precision cutting and ensuring that you sew the seam line that connects the two triangles together, the half square triangles together, that needs to be perfectly straight, so that you can achieve perfect squares, and then from there you would sew your squares together. So without further ado, I've got this beautiful maroon and then a lovely turquoise with some turquoise flowers. They work quite nicely together. You can see, and as I have mentioned before in this post or in this show, the quilt I'm making is a scrappy quilt. It's for what will hopefully be my classroom next year. Well, it will be my classroom next year, but yeah, it's an area of wall that needs to be covered. And so this is what I'm going to be using this for. And I'm just basically been looking in my stash and just trying to find the little bits, my scraps that I've got, and using that up. So without further ado, mosaic number 17. I must be honest with you, all these mosaic. I wasn't able to find any history on this particular block. So it is a pretty simple 2 half square triangles, 16 of them, and basically arranged in the same pattern so that you have some uniformity within the block. So quite simple. First of all, before I continue to cut, I just want to show you what a cutting mat looks like that needs to be replaced. You can see this is what happens when your cutting mat has had its day. That's what it looks like. What actually happens if you use a cutting mat which has started to crack and disintegrate as your fabric goes through the rollers on the machine, the fabric gets caught in in between the plastic of the cutting mat, and it's distorted. It also, when your mats or your dies don't want to cut anymore, people say to me, "Oh, my die is broken." No, it's not. The cutting mat needs to be replaced. That's all. Okay, so we are looking at cutting. We need to cut 60 units. So basically that, because we're working with die number 5, which is 2 half square triangles, that will basically be 8 passes through the die. What I'm going to do then is 2 and 2. So it will be 2 pieces of fabric. But just remember, with the Accuquilt and the dies, you can put up to 6 layers of fabric through the cutting machine at one time. So it really does minimize, and that's the whole thing with the Accuquilt system, is to ensure that you cut in less time with precision. So if you're looking for precision quilts that are cut in minimal time, this is a product that you should be looking at. The Accuquilt is supplied in a variety of sizes. The one that I'm working with here is the Accuquilt Go. This is the sort of middle of the range. There is then the Go Me, which is the baby, and then there's a Studio. So the difference basically between the Studio and the Go and the Accuquilt, the Studios can cut up to 16 pieces of fabric in one pass, whereas and the reason I'm cutting this is I didn't fold my fabric quite right, so when it came off the cutting machine, it was joined. So there we have 1, So we will now need, see, there were 16 of these that we needed to cut. So there's 4. In fact, now that I'm just thinking, I'm actually going to go with 6 in one cut. Or when I say 6, we're going to loop the fabric. We're going to concertina the fabric so that we can get out. I'm going to layer it so that there's 6 pieces of fabric on the machine. I've also had questions from people as to how much wastage is there. You know, there is a little bit of wastage, probably a little bit more than you would get using a rotary cutter. But what I then do with that is I save all of that, all of those cut-offs, and I've got a box here behind me. Let me show you what it looks like. That's basically what it looks like. And I use that then for confetti quilts. So nothing ever goes to waste, you know, at the end of the day. So as you can see, I'm concertinaing the fabric. I still need to, however, make sure that I am over all pieces of the die or all the blades in the die. So we've got here 1, 2, 3. We'll go with 4 here, simply because I don't have any more fabric. When I say I could then fold it this way as well if I wanted to, but I generally find that the more fabric I put into the machine or put through the rollers, the more chance there is of distortion and the pieces not being cut nicely. What I will also do now is we will use the old cutting mat on one pass through the machine so that you can see what happens when the cutting mat needs to be changed. There we go. We've had a bit of a whoopsie. Okay, so I did show you, ladies, on Friday or during the week last week how to, if you come across a piece where you have mislaid your fabric and you don't get it cut properly, what I recommend you do is you find your little piece of paper. There we go. Which you've pre-cut your corner or your triangle out of a piece of paper. You're going to lay this up. Well, what we're going to first of all do is we're actually going to slit that. There we go. I haven't plugged the iron in. I want to quickly do that just so that we can give it a bit of an iron. But if I look, there's not really anything. This one piece I see is a little bit, it needs a bit of an iron, and once we've ironed it out, everything will be hunky-dory. Thank goodness. Just want to quickly give this a press. Let's let that heat up a bit. So how many do we have now? We've got 4, 8, 12. We need to do one more pass of 2. So the first pass I should have done 4, or I should have folded the fabric 4 times. And what I then do is I just cut these pieces off as I work. And they then go into that box. There's another piece which could get in the way. Just cut it off. Throw it into this confetti box. Okay, so we're going to use this mat now. I want to try and give you an idea. I'm actually not even sure it's going to cut, to see what happens when you use a mat that's not in a good place. And hopefully we actually see the results. Yes, perfect. You can see, so we've used this dye. You saw me using the dye with the cutting mat that was fully functional, and now you see me use the dye, same dye, with a mat that needs to be replaced. And you can clearly see what happens when the mat needs to be replaced. So it's not your my blades are blunt. It's the mat. The mat is hard work with this machine. I just wanted to show you what happened when you use a cutting mat that, as I say, that needs to be replaced. And this could be quite time consuming. So the mats we have in stock constantly. They're always in stock. When I run out of stock, we order new mats. You can find the mats on our website which is www.keepcalmandquilt. That is the website for South African sales. Okay, so there you go. You can see there's some holes in here. We'll cut off those pieces later and put them into our scrap pile. You can always use them for applique pieces, smaller applique pieces. Okay, I see that we haven't had too much of a oopsie here with these two. They'll work quite nicely. I don't need to be doing any kind of not alterations, but marking on them to be able to fit them in. So the next fabric we're going to work with is the floral fabric, again, 4 and 4. So let's not mess around this time, and let's just do the 4 and the 4. And let's in fact do it like that, so that the fabric can run behind it as it goes through the cutting machine. Keep in mind that if your fabric does get caught underneath the dye when it's running through the machine, nothing drastic is going to happen, except that your fabric is going to get a really, really serious crease in it. Okay, so there we have them folded. I'm just checking on the actual dye again that I'm in the right place, that I've got. I try to be as sparing with my fabric as possible, but at the same time, I don't really want to have to recut things. So this is going to be fine, a bit of a waste. Okay, so now you see I'm using the normal, a new mat. I'm not even going to change the concertina layout of my fabric. I'm going to keep it exactly the same. And of course, if you really want to try and save even more time, what you can actually do is layer the fabric one on top of each other. So then as it comes off the machine, it's ready to be stitched together. You don't even have to line it up on the fabric squares. They are cut together. They are perfectly aligned. Okay, so there we go. As I said, we're not even going to change our fabric setting here. All I'm going to do is make sure that everything is straight again. Put it onto the die. Make sure that we are cutting everything. We don't want to have any oopsies. Okay, we've everything sorted that side, and again, we're going to go through. So just remember with your cutting mats, you need to alternate one side. That way the mat will last a lot longer. And try and cut on different areas of the mat. Don't constantly cut in the center. If you can, try and cut on the corners, and that's you need to use the whole mat up. If you have a look at this, you can see I've cut everywhere on this mat. Everywhere. Your dies. What I normally when you initially bought your die, the cutter, you really pick out the fiber that is caught up in the corners of your die. You don't necessarily need to use the pick tool from Accuquilt. You can use some tweezers or a dentist pick. That's what I've got. So there's a number of different things you can use. However, we do, if need be, bring in the picks. So with the fabric, you can quite clearly see what we've cut. These pieces here will go into my applique box, and the smaller pieces I will put into that confetti quilt block, or box, should I say. So nothing ever goes to waste. It's always here for another project. Okay, so with this particular block, what you're going to do is first you're going to do all of your blocks. You're going to stitch the two triangles together. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to lay them out so that we can try and do a little bit of chain piecing. Okay, so what I've always said to you about, or what I always say on these shows or these broadcasts about the Accuquilt, and what I so enjoy with regard to what I really enjoy about this product, is that you can see your triangles or your pieces line up perfectly. If you can line up these pieces perfectly and you can stitch them with a perfect seam allowance, you will end up with perfect blocks. Obviously, it does come down to you, and how straight your lines, or how precise you are. But it definitely helps having a piece or a shape that is cut precisely the way that you need it to be. Okay. I just like to do this, you don't have to, but I just find that if I pin the two corners before I start sewing, it just helps a little bit to ensure that the block is a perfect square, because with this particular block, if you don't get perfect squares when piecing these two half square triangles, you're going to end up with something that doesn't look attractive at all. Okay. So again, as I've mentioned, the Accuquilt is available in, or the Accuquilt cube is available in a 12, a 10, a 12, an 11, a 10, a 9, an 8, and a 6-inch block. It also has companion cubes that go with it, so you can get your companion cubes of corners, or you can get your companion cubes of angles. And then that will give you a number of extra dies that you can then make. Currently with this, just with the cube, you can make, I think it's 76 different blocks. If you buy either of the cube, the companion kits, that then goes up to 216 blocks. And then obviously if you buy angles, 216. If you buy the squares, or should I say the corners, then you have a whole variety of blocks that you can achieve. I do I have the 12-inch, I have the 9-inch, the 8-inch, and the 6-inch, and then I have the companion cube of corners for each of them, except for the 9-inch. And then after I had bought my cubes, they then launched the 10-inch. I haven't purchased that yet. What size cube? It's very difficult to advise on that. Whichever block size you personally prefer to work with would be the answer. It really depends on you. What we will be doing in the new year is looking at ways to design, so looking at additional blocks whereby you cut out just pieces of paper and you work with your pieces of paper to see if you can design other blocks. It's really interesting when you start to get 2 or 3 different cubes, and then you can use the cubes amongst each other, or with each other, and it really it gives for a wide variety of geometric shapes. Bit of repetitive work in this particular block. But at least it's not a difficult block to piece. It's just you need to be quite precise, and you need to ensure that your seam allowances, as with all piecing, is accurate, but particularly more so with this block. Okay. If anybody's watching who's doing their SAQG Teachers Accreditation this year, I'm also doing it, and I have cut all of my pieces for my squares, or for my samples with the Accuquilt. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do it for our last assignment, because it's a paper piecing assignment, foundation paper piecing or foundation piecing, so I don't see that work happening. But for everything else, I've used my Accuquilt to cut out precise and perfect shapes. And then this block is pretty easy to piece. We are going to do all of these triangles, and then from there we are going to piece them in strips like that, like that. I've used a off-white, a slightly grey colour, because tan or beige, you know, that sort of, but I'm not, I like the grey. Remember to always work with your needle in the needle down position. It just helps secure your work as you stitch. I'm also working here with a Eleanor Burns Quilt in a Day. This is called Quilt in a Day Sew Straight. It's basically a plastic piece that you put onto your machine, and it just helps you keep your sewing straight with the right seam allowance. It helps with mitered corners. You don't have to actually measure. You can do everything using this little plastic doodad. And then you want to just try and keep your stitches as straight as possible. It's rather imperative with this, as I say, with this particular block. Okay, half an hour. Wow, 16 of these little squares that you need to piece. saw Anastasia yesterday, and she was saying to me, Rayleigh, when you sew, what are we supposed to do? So I have thought about pre-recording these sessions. It just does take quite a lot of space on the computer. So it's something that we are investigating so that we can then just fast forward through all these dreary stitching times. Two more to go. Feels like it's never going to end. Okay. Okie dokie. There we go. All right, so we've got 16 units done. What I'm going to do is I'm just quickly going to snip them up and we're going to press them. Remember to take off your excess threads. In fact, let's move over here so I can be a bit closer to the camera so that you can see what's going down. Oh, my tea is nearly cold. First cup of tea this morning. I had Oliver joining me, I think it was at about 3 o'clock this morning. He had a nightmare. And you know, once the kids get into bed with you, then, so I woke up a bit late, and then I didn't get a cup of tea. Okay, so what I'm going to do is we are going to fold, we're going to iron or press the seam towards the maroon piece of fabric. And that should be how it will be for each piece. And remember, you don't want to iron it, you just want to press it. You don't want your fabric pieces to stretch. basically have your first row. All of these have turned out quite nicely. We've got the seam allowance right in the center seam, and if you're making perfect squares, then this will turn out quite nicely. I find the ironing process is a lot easier to do when you basically, I'm going to show you on this, you're going to take your blue, put the blue side or the side that you want the seam to face away from, place it on the ironing board, lift it, the top piece of fabric up, and then just fold it over. And that will then give you such a nice crisp finish. Let's get these all lined up, ready. 5 more left. I also just need to remember when I'm piecing my blocks now as I put them together that there were 2 blocks or 2 triangles that didn't get cut quite on that we had to separate them ourselves. I hadn't folded the fabric quite perfectly. So I just need to keep that in mind when placing or when stitching these blocks together, that I don't end up with a slightly wonky square. I need to just compensate for that in my seam allowance. Alrighty, there we go. I seem, aha, okay. I was just going to say, my goodness, I think that there is a problem. Houston, we have a problem. But we found a problem, thankfully. Alrighty, there we go. Okay, simple enough now. What we're going to do, 1, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2. I'm going to just basically take, and again, I'm going to chain piece. So what we are going to do is we are going to try and fit these things together, and we need to make sure that we are stitching along the correct line or along the correct seam as we go. So I am going to pin, simply because I want to make sure that I'm getting a perfect square. It's always good to work off a design board when you are piecing. You can place your block on the design board and see exactly where things fit and what they look like. Okay. Try and remember that they need to sit as square as possible on top of each other. Then you know that you're right, that you're going to have a pleasant or a block that's not lopsided. So here is one of the blocks I know is one of the triangles that I didn't cut quite perfectly. You can see when it lines up, it's not 100%. So I've worked that into my design or into my seam allowance, and you'll never know that there was a bit of an issue. Okay, nearly done. Nearly done. There we go. Again, just making sure that those triangles or that square sits as a square on top. All right. There we go, ready to rock and roll. I didn't want to leave the machine on while I was busy pinning. It's not good for your machine to have it running constantly. So now when I stitch these squares or stitch these pieces, I want to try and make sure that it sits nicely. It's a proper square. It's not a squiff square. You know what I'm saying? It must be, they must sit nicely on top of each other. If they do, you will find that it'll come out really, really nicely. Oh, you know what I'm going to do? Just move this in a bit. Take out the pin. We don't want to drive over any pins. It can mess up our timing on our machines. You might need to put a little bit of tension on your piece as it goes through the machine to ensure that you don't have any so that the squares fit together nicely. They might have just stretched a little in the stitching process, so just try and keep them as square or as taut as possible. As I say, you're going to have to stretch them in a bit to try to get them to fit together, because they may have stretched a bit. But generally, it's not too bad. I have a bit of an issue here. I think that the seam allowance has gone a little bit skew. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do it again. As I say, simply because with this particular block, you really need precision. And I can see that my seam allowance, okay, well, it's gone in the same way. Okay. Okay, nearly done. Okay, so there we have all 8 units done. Again, we're going to iron them. What are we sitting on? 53 minutes. Yeah, it's quite late. This time I'm going to iron again towards the darkest, or in fact, no, we're going to iron towards the blue. On this, so what we are actually in fact going to be doing is some of them I think we're going to put towards the blue, and some of them we are going to put towards the, or I mean the maroon. Immediately I'm going to attach these two together because I have ironed their seam allowances the same way. So what we're basically going to be doing is ironing the seam allowance of the one row one way and of the second row a different way, so that when we get to joining the rows together, then the seams will nest quite nicely. But why I've done that is just so that I know, okay, fine, that is my lefty. I'm now going to do a righty, and then I'm going to do another lefty. Let's have a squiz and see what we've got going on here. Like that. And that's like that. Okay, so this one we are now going to do this way. Try and keep your units together, then it won't get confusing just now. And here, see, I've got quite a lot of extra thread. Cut off your excess thread. It's just going to get in the way. Okay, there we go. This one attached to this one. See, we're running close on to an hour. And I don't like to go over an hour with these things. So you can see that to continue with this block, you're going to attach your 4 sections together. Remember to iron each section the opposite way. So you want 2 lying to the left and 2 lying to the right row, should I say, so that you will have your seams will nest nicely when you attach your rows together. I see that I've pressed these to opposite sides. So what I'm basically going to do is just take the next 2, and let's see what we're doing here. There we go. You know, obviously once I'm finished the whole block, I'll then take it to my big iron and I'll press it nicely, which will just give it a better finish. This little iron is a bit, as I say, it's a bit small. Check, check, okay, they are correct. Check, check. Check twice, cut once. Check twice, stitch once. If you don't check, you are going to use the unpicker. And then our last one. Okie dokie. Okay, so as I say, I don't like to run past an hour on these things. I see that we're coming up to 60 minutes. So I'm just going to explain to you how we piece the rest of this block. So obviously we're going to put our seam allowance through there. We'll end up then with 4 sections that look like this. Then with each section, we are going to attach them like so. And just remember to alternate your backs with regards to the way that you've sewn that seam allowance. That way you'll get some seams that will nest nicely and your block will look perfect. Thank you for joining us today. I do understand I haven't finished the block. I'll do that once I've switched the camera off. And then we'll have a look at it on Friday to see what the finished result looks like. Our finished result from Thursday, oh, it's up there, but we did see that when it was done, when it was finished. So let's as I say, we'll show you on Friday what the Mosaic number 17 looks like completed. Thank you for your time. I hope you've enjoyed the broadcast today. I've enjoyed giving you the demo, and I hope to please go and have a look at our website, and we'll see you soon. Thanks then. Have a good one. Bye.